Chapter 1. New Year, same Kevin. Kevin Davidson stood on his narrow balcony, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn gray hoodie, watching fireworks bloom like neon flowers against the ink-black sky. The city was alive tonight. Horns honking, laughter spilling from open windows, music thumping from rooftop parties. But up here, 3 floors above the chaos, it felt like another planet. His planet. Quiet, predictable, safe. He sipped from a chipped mug of coffee that had long gone cold, but he didn't care. It wasn't about the taste. It was about the ritual. Every New Year's Eve for the past 6 years, he'd done the same thing. Stand here, watch the fireworks, and remind himself that peace was better than pain. No drama, no family, no heartbreak. Just him and the sky. A cheer erupted from the street below. Someone counting down too early, probably drunk. Kevin smirked faintly. He wasn't bitter anymore. Not really. That phase had burned out years ago, leaving only a kind of quiet resignation. He'd built a life that worked. A decent engineering job, a small apartment, a gym membership he actually used. He had hobbies, woodworking, running, the occasional binge of old sci-fi movies. He had enough. Enough to keep the loneliness from feeling like a disease. He leaned against the railing, the metal cold against his forearms, and let his mind wander where it always wandered on nights like this, back to the ghosts. He could still see Janet's 16th birthday party like it was yesterday. Balloons, cake, a shiny new car parked in the driveway with a bow big enough to choke a horse. He'd stood in the corner, invisible, nursing a cup of flat soda while everyone fawned over her. 2 years later, his own 16th birthday had come and gone with nothing but a card that arrived 2 days late. Happy birthday, Kevin, in generic cursive, signed with names that felt more like signatures than love. He'd never said a word. What was the point? You can't teach people to care. You can't make them see you when they've spent your whole life looking past you. The fireworks crescendoed, painting his face in bursts of red and gold. Kevin exhaled slowly, the breath fogging in the winter air. He wasn't angry anymore. He'd done the work, therapy, self-reflection, all that jazz. He'd accepted the truth. His family didn't love him, and that was okay. It had to be okay, because the alternative was living in a permanent state of wanting something he'd never get. His phone buzzed on the railing, startling him. He glanced at the screen. A text from his neighbor, "Party downstairs. Come on, man. Don't be a hermit," followed by 3 confetti emojis and what looked like a dancing llama. Kevin chuckled under his breath. He liked his neighbor in small doses. The guy was friendly, loud, and perpetually optimistic. The human equivalent of a golden retriever. Kevin typed back, "Thanks, but I'm good. Happy New Year." Short, polite, final. The phone buzzed again almost immediately. "You're missing out. Free champagne. And karaoke." Kevin shook his head, smiling despite himself. Karaoke. The last time he sang in public was 5th grade choir, and even then, he'd mouthed half the words. He set the phone face down and turned back to the sky. Another explosion of color lit up the horizon, and for a moment, he let himself imagine what it would feel like to share this view with someone. Not family, never family, but someone who saw him, really saw him. The thought was dangerous, so he shoved it away. Inside, the clock on his microwave blinked 11:59. 1 minute to midnight. 1 minute to a new year that would look exactly like the old one because that was the plan. Stability, control, no surprises. He raised his mug in a mock toast to the skyline. "Here's to another year of peace," he murmured, voice barely audible over the distant roar of celebration. The first firework of midnight shot upward, a comet trailing sparks, and Kevin watched it burst into 1,000 glittering shards. Somewhere below, people were kissing, hugging, shouting promises they'd break by February. Kevin stayed where he was, alone but steady, and felt the faintest flicker of something he couldn't name. Not hope. He didn't believe in that anymore. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the tiniest whisper that life had a sense of humor, and he was overdue for the punchline. Chapter 2, Coffee, Chaos, and Chemistry. Kevin Davidson believed in 2 things. Strong coffee and minimal human interaction before 9 a.m. Unfortunately, the universe had other plans. The coffee shop was packed, a hive of chatter and clinking mugs, the air thick with roasted beans and optimism. Kevin stood in line, scrolling through emails on his phone, mentally preparing for the first workday of the year. He had a meeting at 10, a project deadline looming, and 0 patience for small talk. "Next," the barista called, and Kevin stepped forward, rattling off his order like a soldier reciting code. Large black coffee. No sugar. He slid his card across the counter, grabbed the receipt, and moved to the pickup station. Easy, efficient, no drama. Then chaos struck. A blur of motion. A woman juggling a laptop bag, a phone, and what appeared to be a pastry box, collided with him like a rogue comet. His coffee, freshly poured and steaming, launched into the air in a graceful arc before landing squarely on his chest. Kevin froze, staring down at the spreading stain on his hoodie. The woman gasped, eyes wide behind oversized glasses. "Oh my God. I am so sorry." Kevin blinked, processing the situation with the calm of a man who had long ago accepted that life was mostly a series of inconveniences. "Well," he said dryly, "that's one way to warm up." The woman winced, fumbling for napkins. "I didn't see you. I was trying to answer a text and, ugh, I'm an idiot." She shoved a wad of napkins at him, nearly dropping her phone in the process. "Here, take these, please." Kevin accepted the napkins, dabbing at his hoodie. It was a lost cause, but he appreciated the effort. "It's fine," he said, voice even. "Happens." She looked up then, and Kevin got his first clear look at her. Bright hazel eyes, hair pulled into a messy bun that somehow looked intentional, and a smile hovering on the edge of panic. She was striking in a way that felt unpolished and real. "I'll buy you another coffee," she blurted, already turning toward the counter. "Seriously, it's the least I can do." "That's not necessary," Kevin started, but she was gone, weaving through the crowd like a woman on a mission. He sighed, resigned, and tossed the napkins into the trash. Moments later, she returned, triumphantly holding a fresh cup. "Here, large black, no sugar. I paid extra for an apology shot of espresso." Kevin accepted the cup, amused despite himself. "An apology shot?" She grinned, a little sheepish. "It's a thing now, or it should be." He studied her for a beat, then said, "You always this energetic before coffee?" "Only when I'm mortified," she said, laughing. "I'm Sophie, by the way." "Kevin." He took a cautious sip of the coffee. Perfect temperature, strong enough to wake the dead. "Thanks." "No problem." Sophie shifted her bag on her shoulder, balancing the pastry box like a circus act. "I promise I'm not usually a walking disaster. Today's just a lot." Kevin raised an eyebrow. "First day back." "Yep. New year, new chaos." She smiled, and something about it, bright, unguarded, made Kevin feel like the room had tilted slightly. "What about you? Big plans for 2026? Kevin considered lying, saying something generic like travel more or learn guitar. Instead, he said, "Survive." Sophie laughed, a quick, genuine sound that drew a few curious glances from nearby tables. "That's refreshingly honest." He shrugged. "I aim for achievable goals." She opened her mouth to reply, then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and groaned. "I'm late. Again." She looked back at him, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Thanks for not yelling at me." "I don't yell," Kevin said. "Waste of energy." "Noted." She backed toward the door, juggling her things like a pro. "Maybe I'll see you around, Kevin." "Maybe," he said, though he doubted it. People like Sophie, bright, chaotic, warm, didn't orbit his world for long. Still, as she disappeared into the crowd, Kevin found himself staring at the door longer than necessary, his coffee cooling in his hand. For the first time in years, the day felt different, unpredictable, and maybe, just maybe, that wasn't a bad thing. Chapter 3, Accidental Allies. Kevin Davidson prided himself on being prepared. He liked schedules, clear expectations, and meetings that started on time. So when his boss emailed him at 8:15 a.m., with "We've brought in a freelance designer for the new campaign. She'll join your 10 a.m. meeting," Kevin barely blinked. Fine. Designers were usually harmless. A little eccentric, maybe, but harmless. By 9:55, the conference room was filling up. Project managers, marketing leads, Kevin with his laptop open and notes neatly arranged. He was reviewing the specs when the door swung open and Chaos breezed in wearing a mustard yellow scarf. "Sorry I'm late," Sophie announced, juggling a laptop bag and a coffee cup like a circus act. Her hair was in the same messy bun as yesterday, and her glasses perched precariously on her nose. She looked exactly like the woman who had baptized his hoodie in caffeine less than 24 hours ago. Kevin stared, momentarily forgetting how to breathe. Sophie froze mid-step, eyes widening as recognition dawned. "Oh, hi, hi," Kevin said, voice flat but laced with irony. "Small world." Sophie winced, then grinned like someone who knew she was in trouble but planned to charm her way out. "Guess I owe you another apology." "Guess so," Kevin said, closing his laptop with deliberate calm. "Though this time, maybe keep the coffee upright." A few people chuckled. Sophie flushed but recovered quickly, sliding into the chair across from him. "Noted. No coffee assaults during meetings." The project manager cleared his throat. "Okay, team, let's get started." As introductions circled the table, Kevin kept his expression neutral, though his mind was anything but. Sophie, here, in his workspace. He'd assumed yesterday's encounter was a one-off, a blip in his otherwise predictable life. Now she was sitting across from him, smiling like the human embodiment of sunshine, and Kevin felt unsettled. The meeting kicked off, and Sophie wasted no time making her presence known. When the marketing lead outlined the campaign goals, she leaned forward, eyes bright. "We need something bold, something that pops off the screen and makes people stop scrolling." Kevin tapped his pen against his notebook. "Bold is fine, as long as it doesn't compromise functionality." Sophie shot him a look, playful but challenging. "Functionality is important, sure, but if no one notices it, What's the point? The point, Kevin said evenly, is that it works. And the point, Sophie countered, is that it works and looks amazing. The room chuckled again, sensing the spark of tension. Or maybe chemistry. Kevin ignored them, focusing on his notes, though he could feel Sophie's gaze like a spotlight. By the time the meeting wrapped, Kevin had a headache and a growing suspicion that Sophie was going to be a problem. Not professionally. She was clearly talented, her ideas sharp and creative. But personally, she was too much. Too bright, too warm, too willing to poke at the walls he'd spent years building. As everyone filed out, Sophie lingered, adjusting her scarf. So, she said lightly, looks like we're stuck working together. Looks like, Kevin said, slipping his laptop into his bag. She tilted her head, studying him. You always this serious? Only on days that end in Y, Kevin replied. Sophie laughed, a quick burst of sound that made something in his chest tighten unexpectedly. Good to know. I'll try not to ruin your hoodie again. Appreciated, Kevin said, and walked out before she could say anything else. But as he headed back to his office, he realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deadlines or specs. He was thinking about Sophie, and wondering what other chaos she might bring into his carefully ordered life. Chapter 4. The dinner that wasn't. Kevin Davidson stared at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. The message was simple, cheerful, and utterly terrifying. Dinner tonight? Casual. My friends are fun, promise. 7 p.m. at Luca's. Sophie, he read it 3 times, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less social. They didn't. Luca's was a trendy Italian place downtown, the kind of spot where people laughed too loudly and ordered cocktails with names like Sunset Serenade. Kevin preferred places where the menu fit on one laminated sheet and nobody cared if you ate alone. He considered declining. He even typed out sorry, busy tonight before deleting it. Twice. Because the truth was, he wasn't busy. He just didn't do this. Dinners with strangers, spontaneous plans, anything that involved vulnerability disguised as fun. But Sophie's message had a tone he couldn't ignore. Bright, warm. Like an open door he hadn't realized he wanted to walk through. Against his better judgment, he typed back, sure, see you there. By 6:45, Kevin was regretting every life choice that led him to this moment. He stood in front of his closet, staring at rows of neutral shirts like they held the answer to world peace. What did one wear to a casual dinner that probably wasn't casual at all? He settled on a navy button-down and dark jeans, safe, boring, aggressively unremarkable. The restaurant was buzzing when he arrived, all exposed brick and Edison bulbs, the air thick with garlic and laughter. Sophie was already there, waving from a corner booth like a beacon. She wore a green sweater that made her eyes look like spring, and her smile hit him like a warm front. You made it, she said as he slid into the booth. I was starting to think you'd bail. I considered it, Kevin admitted deadpan. Several times. Sophie laughed, and the sound loosened something in his chest. Well, I'm glad you didn't. This is Mia and Jordan, she added, gesturing to the couple across from her. They're harmless. Mostly. Mostly. Jordan grinned. We only bite on weekends. Kevin offered a polite nod, already bracing for the small talk storm. But to his surprise, Mia and Jordan were easy, funny, relaxed, the kind of people who didn't make you feel like you were auditioning for friendship. Conversation flowed, punctuated by Sophie's quick wit and Kevin's dry humor, which earned more laughs than he expected. When the waiter came for orders, Sophie nudged him. You have to try the gnocchi. Life-changing. Kevin arched a brow. Life-changing pasta? Don't mock it until you've tasted it, she said, eyes sparkling. Trust me. He ordered the gnocchi. Halfway through dinner, Kevin realized something unsettling. He was enjoying himself. Not just tolerating, not just surviving, actually enjoying. Sophie was magnetic, her energy pulling him out of the quiet corner he usually occupied. She teased him about his engineer brain. He countered with sarcastic jabs about her artistic chaos. And somewhere between the breadsticks and dessert menu, he caught himself smiling like it was second nature. So, Kevin, Mia said, leaning in. How do you know Sophie? Work, Kevin said simply. Work and coffee, Sophie added with a grin. He's the guy I assaulted with caffeine yesterday. Kevin shook his head. You make it sound like a felony. It felt like one, Sophie said, laughing. But he forgave me. Sort of. Still considering, Kevin murmured, earning another round of laughter. By the time the check arrived, Kevin felt lighter than he had in years. He walked Sophie to her car, the winter air crisp and sharp, their breath fogging in the glow of streetlights. Thanks for coming, she said, tucking her hands into her coat pockets. I know this probably wasn't your idea of a perfect night. Kevin hesitated, then said, it was better than expected. Sophie smiled, and for a moment, the world narrowed to that curve of her lips, the way her eyes softened like she could see past every wall he'd built. Good, she said quietly. Maybe next time, you'll even look forward to it. Kevin didn't answer. He couldn't, not with his heart doing something reckless in his chest. Instead, he nodded, offered a faint smile, and walked away before he could say something he wasn't ready to mean. Chapter 5. Cracks in the armor. Kevin Davidson liked his office quiet. He liked his projects neat, his deadlines predictable, and his coworkers well tolerable. Sophie was none of those things. She breezed into the workspace like a gust of spring air, scattering Kevin's carefully stacked mental files. Every day since the dinner, she'd found new ways to infiltrate his routine, dropping by his desk with questions, sending him mock-serious emails titled urgent, need your brain power, and occasionally leaving doodles on sticky notes that made him smirk despite himself. Today was no different. Kevin was deep in CAD designs when a voice chirped behind him, "Morning, Mr. Functionality." He didn't look up. "Morning, Ms. Chaos." Sophie grinned, sliding into the chair beside his desk without invitation. "I like that. Sounds like a superhero duo." "Or a cautionary tale," Kevin said, eyes still on his screen. She leaned over, peering at the design. "Wow, that's a lot of lines." "It's called precision," Kevin said. "You should try it sometime." "Precision is overrated," Sophie countered. "You know what's not overrated? Personality, which this design desperately needs." Kevin finally looked at her, one brow arched. "It's a structural component, not a dating profile." "Still," Sophie said, tapping the screen lightly, "people notice details. A curve here, a color tweak there. It matters." Kevin sighed, but there was no real heat in it. "You're relentless." "Thank you," Sophie said brightly. "I take that as a compliment." They spent the next hour debating aesthetics versus functionality, their voices weaving through the hum of keyboards and muted phone calls. Sophie gestured wildly, her scarf trailing like punctuation marks, while Kevin countered with calm logic and the occasional dry jab that made her laugh. At one point, she paused, studying him with a curious tilt of her head. "You know, for someone who claims to hate chaos, you're surprisingly good at handling mine." Kevin blinked, thrown by the observation. "I don't handle it," he said. "I survive it." "Same thing," Sophie said, smiling. "Survival takes skill." He didn't answer, couldn't really, because the truth was, she wasn't wrong. He'd expected Sophie to be a distraction, a bright, noisy blip in his ordered life. Instead, she was becoming something else, something harder to ignore. Later, as Sophie packed up her things, she glanced at him. "Hey, I'm grabbing lunch at that new Thai place down the street. Want to join?" Kevin hesitated. His default answer was no. Always no, but the word stuck in his throat, tangled with something he didn't want to name. "I have work," he said finally. Sophie nodded, unfazed. "Suit yourself. But you're missing out on the best pad thai in the city." She left with a wave, and Kevin watched her go, a strange tightness in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, just curiosity, just proximity. But as he turned back to his screen, the lines and numbers blurred, and all he could see was Sophie's smile. Chapter 6. The big idea. Sophie had always believed in fixing things. Broken mugs, tangled necklaces, awkward silences. She approached them all with the same stubborn optimism. Everything could be mended if you cared enough. So when it came to Kevin, she assumed the same rule applied. He was brilliant, funny in a dry, blink-and-you-miss-it way and, though he'd never admit it, kind. But there was a wall around him, thick and high, and Sophie hated walls. She wanted to know what was behind it, wanted to understand why a man who seemed so capable of connection kept himself so carefully apart. She got her first clue over lunch 2 days ago, when she'd asked about his family. It was an innocent question. "Any siblings?" And his answer was a single word, flat and final. "One." No elaboration. No smile. Just a subtle shift in his posture like a door slamming shut. Sophie had let it go then, but the silence lingered in her mind like an unfinished sentence. And now, sitting in her apartment with a half-eaten carton of pad thai and her laptop glowing in the dark, she decided she wasn't letting it go anymore. Kevin needed closure. He needed to face whatever ghosts were haunting him, and Sophie, being Sophie, was going to help, even if he didn't ask, especially because he didn't ask. The plan formed quickly, fueled by equal parts good intention and questionable judgment. She'd reach out to his family, arrange a casual dinner, and surprise him. Not in a cruel way. She'd make it warm, safe, a chance for everyone to reconnect. People drift apart all the time, but they could drift back together too. Sophie believed that. She had to. She opened her browser, fingers flying across the keys. Social media made it easy. Kevin's last name wasn't exactly common, and within minutes, she found a smiling woman named Janet Davidson, 2 years older than Kevin, living in a suburb not far from the city. Her profile was full of family photos, holidays, birthdays. A golden retriever named Max. Sophie stared at the screen, her heart tugging. How could Kevin not want this? How could anyone? She hesitated only briefly before sending a message. "Hi Janet. I hope this isn't too strange. I work with Kevin, and I thought it might be nice to surprise him with a family dinner. Would you be open to that?" The reply came faster than Sophie expected. "Oh my God. Yes, we haven't seen Kevin in years. We'd love to." Sophie smiled, relief washing over her. See? This was good. This was right. She set the date for Friday, booked a cozy table at Luca's, the same place where Kevin had laughed more than she'd ever seen, and promised herself it would be perfect. The next morning at work, Sophie was practically vibrating with excitement. She stopped by Kevin's desk, leaning against the edge like she owned the place. Big plans this weekend? Kevin didn't look up from his screen. Work, sleep, repeat. Wow, Sophie said, mock serious. You really know how to party. He smirked faintly. It's a gift. Well, she said, trying to sound casual. Maybe I'll shake things up for you. Kevin glanced at her then, suspicion flickering in his eyes. What does that mean? Nothing, Sophie said quickly, too quickly. Just trust me. Kevin studied her for a long moment, then returned to his work. That's usually the part where things go wrong. Sophie grinned, ignoring the tiny pang in her chest. Not this time. As she walked away, her phone buzzed with a message from Janet. We're so excited. Kevin's going to be thrilled. Sophie smiled, imagining his face when he saw them. Surprised, maybe a little emotional, but grateful. Because that's what people felt when you gave them back something they'd lost. Gratitude, relief, love. She had no idea she was about to break his heart, and her own. Chapter 7. Disaster served warm. Kevin Davidson hated surprises. He hated them with the kind of quiet, bone-deep certainty that came from experience. The kind that taught you surprises were rarely good. So when Sophie texted him dinner tonight, same place as before, you'll love it, he felt a flicker of unease. Still, he went. Because it was Sophie. And against all logic, against every rule he'd written for himself, he wanted to see her. Luca's was warm and glowing when he walked in, the scent of garlic and basil wrapping around him like a familiar coat. He scanned the room, expecting Sophie's bright smile, maybe Mia and Jordan again. Instead, his gaze snagged on a table near the back, and froze. 3 faces turned toward him, faces he knew like scars. His mother, his father, Janet. Kevin stopped dead, the air sucked out of his lungs. For a moment, the restaurant noise faded to a dull roar, his pulse pounding in his ears. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't believe what he was seeing. And then Sophie appeared from behind them, beaming like she just solved world hunger. Kevin. Surprise. He stared at her, words locked behind his teeth. Surprise? Surprise was a birthday cake. Surprise was concert tickets. This was a grenade. Sophie stepped closer, oblivious to the storm gathering in his eyes. I thought it would be nice, start the year fresh, reconnect. Kevin's voice, when it came, was low and sharp enough to cut glass. You did this. Sophie blinked, her smile faltering. Yes, I wanted to help. Help. The word tasted like ash. He looked past her, at the people who had taught him what abandonment felt like. His mother's tentative smile, his father's stiff nod, Janet's bright, brittle cheer. Kevin, it's been so long. He felt the old ache surge, raw and merciless. Without a word, he turned on his heel. Kevin, wait. Sophie's voice chased him as he strode toward the door, but he didn't stop, couldn't. The walls were closing in, the air thick with ghosts, and if he stayed 1 second longer, he'd drown. Outside, the night was cold and sharp, the streetlights blurring as he walked fast, then faster, until Sophie's footsteps caught up with him. Kevin. She grabbed his arm, breathless. Please just talk to me. He spun, anger flaring like a struck match. Talk? You want to talk? Fine. What the hell were you thinking? Sophie flinched but held her ground. I was thinking you deserve a chance to fix things. To heal. Fix things. His laugh was harsh, bitter. You think this is something you fix over pasta? I thought. Her voice cracked. I thought you were hurting. That you needed. You thought wrong. The words came out like a blade, and Sophie's face crumpled. Kevin dragged a hand through his hair, the fury boiling over into something darker. Pain, old and jagged. You don't get it. You don't know what they did. What they didn't do. Then tell me, Sophie whispered. Help me understand. Kevin stared at her, chest heaving, and for a moment he almost did. Almost spilled every memory, every wound. But the weight of it was too much and the trust, God, the trust, was shattered. No, he said, voice flat now, hollow. You don't get to decide what I need. Sophie's eyes shimmered in the glow of the streetlight, her breath fogging in the cold. I was trying to help, and you destroyed the only thing that mattered, Kevin said quietly. Us. The silence that followed was brutal. Sophie's lips parted, but no words came. Kevin turned away, his footsteps echoing on the pavement, each one a severed thread. Behind him, Sophie stood frozen, her heart breaking in the winter air, realizing too late that good intentions could burn bridges faster than hate. Chapter 8. Fallout. Kevin Davidson had always believed silence was safer than words. Words could be twisted, misunderstood, weaponized. Silence, though, it was clean, final. So after Friday night, he wrapped himself in it like armor. He didn't answer Sophie's texts. Not the first one, I'm so sorry, or the second, please just talk to me. He didn't answer the third either, the one that simply said, Kevin? He read them all, of course, each one a pinprick against the numbness settling in his chest. But he didn't reply, because what was there to say? She crossed a line he couldn't uncross. By Monday, the office felt different. Or maybe Kevin did. He kept his head down, buried in CD models and specs, pretending the world beyond his screen didn't exist. Sophie was there. He felt her presence like static, but she didn't approach him. Not once. Her laughter, usually bright and effortless, was muted now, like someone had turned the volume down on her soul. It should have made him feel better. Didn't. At lunch, Kevin sat alone in the break room, stabbing at a salad that tasted like cardboard. His coworker, Mark, the human embodiment of unsolicited advice, plopped into the chair across from him with a grin that could power a small city. "Dude," Mark said, lowering his voice like they were in a spy thriller. "What happened with Sophie? She looks like someone stole her puppy." Kevin didn't look up. "Not your business." "Everything's my business," Mark said cheerfully, "especially when it involves workplace drama." "Spill." Kevin set his fork down, fixing Mark with a stare that could freeze lava. "Drop it." Mark held up his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. But if you want my opinion, I don't. You should talk to her," Mark finished anyway. "Women love communication. It's like emotional Wi-Fi." Kevin blinked. "Emotional Wi-Fi?" "Exactly," Mark said, nodding like a sage. "You gotta keep the signal strong, man." Kevin stared at him for a long moment, then returned to his salad. "You're banned from metaphors." Mark grinned, unfazed. "Just saying. Don't ghost her. Ghosting is bad karma." Kevin didn't answer, because Mark wasn't wrong. Not about karma, not about ghosting, but the thought of facing Sophie, of peeling back the layers of hurt and history, felt impossible. Safer to stay silent. Safer to keep the walls intact. That night, Kevin sat in his apartment, the glow of his laptop casting long shadows. He tried to focus on work, but his mind kept circling back to Sophie. Her face when he walked out, the way her voice cracked when she said I was trying to help. He hated that it haunted him. Hated that it mattered. Because it did. More than he wanted to admit. He closed the laptop, pressing the heels of his hands to his eyes. For years, he'd lived by one rule. Don't let anyone close enough to hurt you. And now, here he was, bleeding from a wound he hadn't seen coming. Across town, Sophie sat curled on her couch, phone in hand, staring at the silence between them like it was a living thing. She'd replayed Friday night 100 times, each loop worse than the last. She'd wanted to help. She'd wanted to give him something good. And instead, she detonated the one thing that mattered most, his trust. Her roommate, Lila, wandered in with a bowl of popcorn and zero sympathy. "You look like a rejected Hallmark card." Sophie groaned. "Thanks." "Seriously?" Lila said, flopping onto the couch. "What happened?" Sophie hesitated, then spilled everything. The plan, the dinner, the explosion. Lila listened, chewing thoughtfully. "Okay," Lila said finally. "That was ambitious." "Stupid," Sophie corrected, voice small. "Ambitious and stupid," Lila agreed, "but also kind of sweet, in a catastrophic way." Sophie buried her face in her hands. "He hates me." "Does he?" Lila asked gently. "Or is he just hurt?" Sophie didn't answer, because she didn't know. All she knew was that she missed him, his dry humor, his steady presence, the way he made her feel like chaos wasn't a flaw but a feature. And she had no idea how to fix what she'd broken. Chapter 9. Olive Branch. Sophie stared at her phone like it was a ticking bomb. 3 days of silence stretched between her and Kevin, heavy and suffocating. She drafted a dozen messages. Long ones, short ones, funny ones, heartfelt ones. But every time, she deleted them. Nothing felt right. Nothing felt enough. Finally, she typed the simplest thing she could think of. "I'm sorry. Truly. I didn't understand, and I should have asked instead of assuming. If you never want to talk to me again, I'll respect that. But I hope you don't." She hovered over the send button, her thumb trembling. Then she pressed it and tossed the phone onto the couch like it might bite her. Across town, Kevin was nursing a cup of coffee that tasted like regret when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, expecting a work notification. Instead, he saw her name. He read the message once, twice, a third time slower. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't manipulative. It was honest, and that made it harder to ignore. Kevin set the phone down, staring at the wall. Part of him wanted to delete the message, erase the temptation to respond. But another part, the part that remembered Sophie's laugh, her stubborn optimism, the way she made his gray world feel less gray, wouldn't let him. He picked up the phone and typed, "You don't get to decide what I need. But you were trying. I know that." He stared at the words, then added, "Coffee tomorrow? Neutral ground. No surprises." He hit send before he could overthink it. Sophie's phone buzzed, and when she saw his reply, her breath caught. Coffee. Tomorrow. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A crack in the wall. A thread of hope. She typed back quickly, "Neutral ground sounds perfect. Thank you." The next day, Sophie arrived at the coffee shop early, nerves jangling like loose change. She chose a corner table, ordered 2 drinks, black coffee for him, chai latte for her, and rehearsed what she'd say. No jokes, no deflection, just truth. When Kevin walked in, her heart stuttered. He looked the same, tall, steady, wrapped in that quiet calm. But there was a tension in his shoulders, a guardedness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Hi," Sophie said softly as he sat down. "Hi," Kevin replied, voice even but not cold. "Progress." She slid the coffee toward him. "Black, no sugar." "Thanks." He took a sip, then set the cup down, his gaze steady on hers. So, Sophie echoed, her fingers twisting around her sleeve. "I messed up." Kevin didn't argue, didn't soften it either. "Yeah." Sophie swallowed hard. "I thought I was helping. I thought if I could give you back something good, it would matter. But I didn't ask what you wanted. And that was wrong." Kevin studied her, his expression unreadable. "Why?" "Because I care," Sophie said simply. "And because I'm an idiot sometimes." A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his face. "Sometimes," she smiled faintly. "Fine. Most of the time." Kevin exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "You don't know what that night was for me." "I want to," Sophie said quietly. "If you'll let me." For a long moment, Kevin said nothing. Then slowly he nodded. "Not here. Not now. But maybe." Sophie's chest loosened, just a little. "I'll take maybe." Kevin's mouth curved, barely, but enough to make her heart flip. "You're relentless." "Thank you," Sophie said. And for the first time in days, she felt like maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. Chapter 10. Love, actually. Maybe. Kevin Davidson wasn't good at talking about feelings. He could explain the tensile strength of steel, calculate load-bearing ratios in his sleep, but emotions, those were messy, unpredictable, like Sophie. And yet, here he was, sitting across from her in a quiet park on a Sunday afternoon, about to do the one thing he'd spent years avoiding. Open up. The coffee shop had felt too crowded, too public. So when Sophie suggested a walk, he agreed, mostly because it gave him space to breathe. Now they sat on a bench overlooking a frozen pond, bundled in coats, their breath fogging in the crisp winter air. Sophie broke the silence first, her voice soft. "You don't have to tell me everything. Just what you want me to know." Kevin stared at the pond, the thin sheet of ice glinting under pale sunlight. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he spoke. "I grew up in a house where love was conditional," he began, his tone flat but steady. "My sister was the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect smile. She got parties, cars, trips to Europe. I got a birthday card 2 days late." Sophie's brows knit, but she didn't interrupt. Kevin kept going, the words tumbling out like stones he'd carried too long. "I thought maybe if I worked harder, they'd notice. So I did. Straight A's, full scholarship, engineering program. When I graduated, they didn't even show up. No call. Nothing." He swallowed hard, the memory sharp as broken glass. "That was the last straw. I changed my number. Walked away." Sophie's eyes shimmered, but her voice was calm. "Kevin," he shook his head, cutting her off gently. "I'm not angry anymore. I made peace with it. But peace doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending they didn't teach me something important." "What's that?" Sophie asked quietly. "That love isn't real," Kevin said, his voice low. "Not for me." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Sophie's chest ached, but she didn't argue. Not yet. Instead, she reached out, her gloved hand brushing his. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not for Friday. Oh God, I regret that. But for what they did. For what you went through." Kevin stared at their hands, the warmth of her touch seeping through the cold. "You didn't do that," he said. "You just reminded me why I built walls. And maybe," Sophie said softly, "you reminded me why I hate walls." Kevin almost smiled. Almost. "You're relentless." "Thank you," Sophie said, her lips curving faintly. "But for the record, I don't think love is a myth. I think it's messy and hard and terrifying. But real." Kevin looked at her then, really looked, at the stubborn tilt of her chin, the hope flickering in her eyes like a candle against the wind. And for the first time in years, something inside him shifted. Not a collapse, not yet, but a crack, a tiny fracture in the armor. "Maybe," he said quietly, "maybe it's real." Sophie's smile widened, slow and luminous. "I'll take maybe." Kevin exhaled, a laugh escaping before he could stop it. Soft, surprised, almost disbelieving. "You're impossible." "And yet," Sophie said, her fingers curling around his. "You're still here." Kevin didn't argue. He didn't pull away. He just sat there, hand in hers, watching the ice glint under winter sun, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, the new year had a sense of Chapter 11. Rebuilding. Kevin Davidson wasn't sure what rebuilding looked like. Bridges didn't magically reappear after you burned them. They took work, effort, and a willingness to risk getting splinters. And yet, here he was, standing outside the same coffee shop where Sophie had spilled caffeine on his hoodie, wondering if this was how it started. She was already inside, tucked into a corner booth, her green scarf draped over the chair like a flag of truce. When she saw him, her smile was hesitant but real, and something in Kevin's chest loosened. "Hey," Sophie said as he slid into the seat across from her. "Thanks for coming." "Neutral ground," Kevin said, deadpan. "No pasta ambushes." Her lips curved. "Promise. No family reunions either." Kevin smirked faintly, and for the first time in days, the tension between them felt less like a wall and more like a door. Closed, but not locked. They talked about work first, safe territory. Deadlines, design tweaks, the eternal war between aesthetics and functionality. Sophie teased him about his obsession with straight lines. Kevin countered with a jab about her love for artistic chaos. It was easy, almost normal, and Kevin felt the knot in his stomach start to unravel. Then Sophie shifted, her tone softening. "I know we said no heavy stuff, but thank you for telling me what you did the other day." Kevin stared at his coffee, the steam curling like ghosts. "You didn't run," he said quietly. "Most people would." "I'm not most people," Sophie said, her voice steady. "And for the record, I don't think you're unlovable." Kevin's throat tightened, but he masked it with sarcasm. "Bold claim." "True claim," Sophie countered, her eyes locking on his. "You're stubborn, guarded, and occasionally insufferable. But you're also smart, funny, and good, even if you don't see it." Kevin looked away, the words hitting harder than he expected. Compliments always felt like lies, but from Sophie, they sounded like facts. Dangerous facts. They left the coffee shop an hour later, walking side by side through streets dusted with frost. Sophie's scarf trailed like a comet, her laughter spilling into the cold air when Kevin muttered something about her inability to walk in a straight line. "You're smiling," she said, nudging him playfully. "That's progress." "Don't get used to it," Kevin said, but his mouth betrayed him with another curve. Sophie grinned. Too late. That night, Kevin sat in his apartment, staring at the ceiling. He'd spent years building a life that was safe, predictable, untouched by the chaos of other people. And now Sophie was dismantling it piece by piece, not with force but with warmth, with persistence, with the kind of hope he'd sworn off long ago. And for the first time, Kevin wondered if maybe, just maybe, he didn't mind. Chapter 12. The Neighbor's Party. Kevin Davidson had dodged his neighbor's party invitations for 3 years straight. Birthdays, game nights, karaoke marathons. He declined them all with polite texts and airtight excuses. But tonight, as he stood in his apartment staring at Sophie's message, "You promised progress. Come with me," he realized he was out of excuses. Progress. He'd said it himself last week, half joking, but Sophie had latched onto it like a mission statement. And now, here he was, buttoning a shirt that felt too casual for his comfort and wondering if this counted as a terrible idea or a catastrophic one. The hallway was alive with music and laughter when Kevin stepped out. Sophie was waiting by the door, her green scarf looped loosely around her neck, her smile bright enough to make the fluorescent lights look dim. "You came," she said, eyes sparkling. "You're relentless," Kevin replied, deadpan. "Thank you," Sophie said, looping her arm through his before he could protest. "Come on. It's just a party. People. Snacks. Bad singing. You'll love it." "Highly doubtful," Kevin muttered, but he let her lead him inside. The apartment was packed. Warm bodies, loud voices, the scent of pizza mingling with cheap champagne. Kevin's neighbor, a human golden retriever named Dave, bounded over like he'd won the lottery. "Kevin, you exist." Dave clapped him on the shoulder with enough force to rattle bones. "And you brought a friend. Man, this is historic." "Glad to contribute to your personal mythology," Kevin said dryly. Dave laughed like Kevin had just delivered a stand-up routine. "Drinks are in the kitchen. Karaoke starts in 10. Don't disappear." Kevin opened his mouth to promise he'd absolutely disappear, but Sophie tugged him toward the kitchen before he could commit. An hour later, Kevin was nursing a beer and wondering how his life had spiraled into this. A crowded room, neon lights, and Sophie perched on the arm of his chair, laughing at something Dave said about emotional Wi-Fi. Kevin made a mental note to ban Mark from sharing metaphors with strangers. "You're smiling?" Sophie whispered, leaning close enough for her hair to brush his shoulder. "I'm tolerating," Kevin corrected, though his lips betrayed him with another curve. "Same thing," Sophie said, her grin mischievous. "You're doing great." Before Kevin could reply, Dave announced karaoke signups, and Sophie's hand shot up like a rocket. "Me and Kevin." Kevin froze. "Absolutely not." "Absolutely yes," Sophie countered, dragging him toward the makeshift stage like a woman possessed. "It's a duet. You'll survive." "I don't sing," Kevin said, digging in his heels. "Neither do I," Sophie said cheerfully. "That's the fun part." 5 minutes later, Kevin was clutching a microphone, staring at the lyrics to a pop song he vaguely recognized, while Sophie belted out the chorus with zero shame and infinite enthusiasm. People cheered. Phones recorded. Kevin muttered the words under his breath, his voice low and rough, until Sophie nudged him with her elbow. "Come on," she whispered, eyes dancing. "Live a little." And for reasons he couldn't explain, Maybe the beer, maybe the music, maybe Sophie. Kevin did. He sang. Badly. Awkwardly. But he sang. And when Sophie threw her arm around his shoulders and laughed like the world was theirs, Kevin felt something he hadn't felt in years. Free. Later, as they slipped out into the cold night, Sophie looked at him, her cheeks flushed from laughter. See? Progress. Kevin shook his head, but his smile lingered. You're impossible. And yet, Sophie said softly, her breath fogging in the winter air, you're still here. Kevin didn't argue. He just walked beside her, the sound of her laughter echoing in his mind like a song he didn't want to forget. Chapter 13. Fireworks again. Kevin Davidson stood on his balcony, hands tucked into his coat pockets, watching the city glitter under a winter sky. It was late, past midnight, and the streets below were quiet now, the chaos of the neighbor's party fading into memory. He could still hear Sophie's laughter in his head, bright and unguarded, like sunlight breaking through clouds. For years, this balcony had been his fortress, his ritual, a place to remind himself that solitude was safer than hope. But tonight felt different. Tonight, the air hummed with something new, something fragile and terrifying and good. The door creaked behind him, and Kevin turned to see Sophie step out, her green scarf trailing like a comet. She smiled, soft and tentative, as if asking permission to share the view. Cold out here, she said, her breath fogging in the glow of streetlights. Yeah, Kevin said, his voice low, but quiet. Sophie moved closer, her boots crunching against the thin layer of frost. You always watch the sky? Every new year, Kevin said. Habit. She tilted her head, studying him. What do you think about? Kevin hesitated, then smiled faintly. Until recently, how to avoid surprises. And now? Sophie asked, her voice gentle. Kevin looked at her then, really looked, at the stubborn tilt of her chin, the warmth in her eyes, the way she stood there like she belonged. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man on the outside looking in. He felt seen. Now, Kevin said quietly, I think maybe surprises aren't so bad. Sophie's lips curved, slow and luminous. Progress. Don't get used to it, Kevin said, but his mouth betrayed him with a smile. Too late, Sophie whispered, and before Kevin could overthink it, before he could retreat behind the walls he'd spent a lifetime building, she reached for his hand. He let her. Her fingers were warm against his, steady and sure, and when the first fireworks shot into the sky, a burst of gold against the black, Kevin didn't watch it alone. He watched it with Sophie, her laughter mingling with the crackle of light, and felt something shift deep inside him. Not a collapse, not a surrender, just a quiet, undeniable truth. Maybe love wasn't a myth. Maybe it was messy and hard and terrifying. And maybe, just maybe, it was worth it.